Serious. People who went missing, what happened? Story 1. This is probably going to sound totally crazy, but I disappeared for 2 weeks when I was in the military, and to this day, nobody can explain what happened. I was deployed overseas, nothing too dangerous, just regular peacekeeping stuff. One Sunday I was doing laundry in the base facility, just killing time before my next shift started. That's the last thing I remember. 2 weeks later, I woke up in my own bed with my squad leader shaking me awake asking where the heck I'd been. Apparently nobody had seen me for 14 days. I wasn't in my room, wasn't at meals, wasn't anywhere on base. They'd filed me as AWOL and were getting ready to start serious disciplinary action. The crazy thing is, I was found right back in my own bed like nothing had happened. The military doctors put me through every test they could think of. Brain scans, psychological evaluations, blood work, everything. They found some abnormalities in my brain scan, something about missing tissue or enlarged spaces. I don't really understand the medical stuff. But basically they said I was more prone to certain mental health issues because of it. I ended up getting medically discharged with a small severance package. The official psychiatrist told me I was not suitable for continued service, which was pretty crushing since I actually loved being in the military. Had been in for almost 4 years at that point and was planning to make it a career. The weirdest part is that during those 2 weeks, I was apparently taking care of myself somehow. I wasn't malnourished or dehydrated when they found me, so I must have been eating and drinking, but I have zero memory of any of it. Sometimes I wonder if the military was testing something on us and just won't admit it. I've heard stories about experimental programs, but honestly, I don't really want to know. Some things are probably better left alone. Story 2. This is embarrassing, but I was 5 and got separated from my mom at the mall. We were in one of those big department stores and I was following what I thought was her jacket. You know how when you're little, you just follow the legs and assume it's your parent? Well, I followed this woman around for probably 20 minutes, staying a few feet behind her like I always did with my mom. She went through the women's clothing section, then to shoes, then to the cosmetics counter. I was getting bored but just hanging out nearby like usual. Then she turned around at the makeup counter and it was a completely different woman. She looked at me like, why is this random kid following me around? I immediately started bawling because I realized I had no idea where my actual mom was. The woman was really sweet though. She took me to customer service where they called my mom's name over the store intercom. My mom came running from the opposite end of the store where she'd been looking for me in the toy section. She'd been searching for like 30 minutes, getting store employees to help and everything. The crazy part is my mom was wearing almost the exact same jacket as the woman I'd been following. Same color, same style, everything. My mom thought it was hilarious once she calmed down from the panic. She still brings it up sometimes when we go shopping together. Story 3. I disappeared for almost 6 weeks when I was 25, and honestly, it probably saved my life. I was in this really toxic relationship with someone who was controlling and emotionally abusive. They monitored my phone, isolated me from friends, made me account for every minute of my day. I felt trapped and didn't know how to get out. One afternoon when they were at work, I just grabbed some clothes, emptied my savings account, and left. I didn't have a plan beyond getting as far away as possible. I ended up taking a train to my aunt's city. She lived across the country and I hadn't talked to her in years. The first week was terrifying. My ex was blowing up my phone, threatening me, saying they'd find me. I finally turned it off completely and stayed with my aunt, who didn't ask too many questions but made it clear I was welcome as long as I needed. During those weeks, I slowly started remembering who I was before that relationship. I got a part-time job at a bookstore, started therapy, began rebuilding my confidence. My aunt helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't normal or healthy. When I finally contacted my family, they were relieved but also shocked. I'd been too ashamed to tell them how bad things had gotten, so they didn't understand why I'd vanished. My parents wanted me to come home, but I stayed with my aunt for another few months while I got my life back together. That time away gave me the distance I needed to see the situation clearly and build up enough strength to stay away from my ex permanently. Sometimes disappearing isn't about being selfish, sometimes it's about survival. I'm in a much better place now, both literally and mentally. Story 4. So this was back in 2019, my junior year. I was going through a really rough patch, bad breakup, struggling with classes, the whole deal. My friends knew I was in a dark place and they were honestly amazing about checking on me regularly. Maybe too amazing, as it turns out. I'd been working on this massive paper for weeks and finally decided to just camp out in the library for the whole weekend to finish it. This was during finals week, so the library was open 24/7. I figured I'd power through, get it done, and reward myself with a proper celebration afterward. I turned my phone on silent mode because I really needed to focus without distractions. What I didn't realize was that my friends had gotten into this habit of doing daily check-ins with each other because of how worried they'd been about me. When I didn't respond to any texts Saturday morning, they started getting concerned. By Saturday evening, when I still hadn't answered and they couldn't find me anywhere on campus, they totally lost it. They spent all night Saturday and most of Sunday morning searching for me. They checked my usual hangout spots, asked people in my classes, even went to some parties thinking maybe I was there. Finally, one of them had the bright idea to actually go inside the library instead of just calling me. They found me at this table on the 4th floor, surrounded by empty coffee cups and snack wrappers, completely absorbed in writing. I looked up to see 3 of my friends standing there looking like they'd seen a ghost. Turns out they'd been about to call my parents and campus security. I felt terrible for scaring them, but also kind of amazed that they cared enough to spend their entire weekend looking for me. Really made me realize how much they meant to me, and how much I meant to them. Things got better after that. Story 5. Hurricane Katrina completely changed my life. I was 14 and living with my aunt in New Orleans when it hit. We thought we were going to ride it out like we always did with storms, but this one was different. When the levees broke, the water came so fast. My aunt grabbed what she could and we climbed up to the attic, then eventually onto the roof. But the current was so strong and the roof was getting slippery. I remember her telling me to hold onto this piece of debris when we got swept into the water. I lost sight of her pretty quickly. I just held onto this chunk of wood and tried to keep my head above water. Everything was chaos, people screaming, debris everywhere, the water was nasty and had all kinds of stuff floating in it. I probably floated for hours before I managed to grab onto this tree. I stayed in that tree all night, scared out of my mind. The next morning a rescue boat spotted me and pulled me out. They took me to this evacuation center where there were hundreds of people looking for family members. I kept asking about my aunt but nobody had seen her. It took 5 days before they found her. She was at a different shelter across town and had been looking for me too. We both thought the other person didn't make it. When we finally found each other, we just held onto each other and cried for like an hour. That experience taught me how quickly everything you know can just disappear. We lost everything in that house, but at least we had each other. My aunt and I are super close now because of what we went through together. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you also show you what really matters. Story 6. Okay, so this happened when I was 12 and it's honestly the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I was a pretty heavy sleepwalker as a kid, but this time was different. I went to bed normally on a Friday night. Next thing I know, I'm waking up on Saturday morning in my neighbor's backyard treehouse. Not just any neighbor, these people who lived like 4 blocks away who I barely knew. I'm talking about people whose names I didn't even know. I woke up and freaked out completely. I was still in my pajamas and it was freezing cold. I had no memory of how I got there or why I was there. The worst part was that I could see their house and there were lights on, which meant they were awake. I was terrified they'd think I was some kind of burglar or something. I climbed down as quietly as possible and started walking home. Problem was, I wasn't totally sure how to get back. I knew the general direction but I'd never walked this route before. I'm wandering around in my PJs at like 7 a.m. looking completely lost. This lady jogging past me stopped and asked if I was okay. I was so embarrassed but I told her I got lost and needed to get home. She was super nice and actually walked me back to my street because she was worried about me. When I got home, my parents were absolutely losing it. They'd found my bedroom door wide open and my bed empty. They'd already called the police and were about to organize a search party. My mom started crying when she saw me, and my dad looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. The crazy part is, we never figured out how I got into that treehouse. It was like 8 feet off the ground with no ladder. The neighbors said they never heard anything and their yard was completely fenced in. To this day, I have no idea how sleepwalking me managed to get in there. My parents put locks on all the doors after that, and I never sleepwalked again. Still gives me the creeps thinking about it. Story 7. When I was 15, I fell asleep on the city bus coming home from school and woke up at the end of the line in some part of town I'd never seen before. The bus driver had somehow not noticed me sleeping in the back seat during his whole route. I had no idea where I was and my phone was dead. The bus depot was closed and there was nobody around to ask for directions. I started walking, hoping to find a main street or something familiar, but everything looked completely different from my neighborhood. I walked for what felt like forever before I found a convenience store that was still open. The guy behind the counter let me use their phone to call my mom, but I realized I didn't actually know our home number by heart since I always just used my cell phone. Finally, I remembered my mom's work number and called there, but she had already left for the day. Her coworker gave me mom's cell number and when I called her, she totally lost it. She had been calling my school and all my friends trying to figure out where I was. She picked me up about an hour later, and we figured out I was like 20 miles from home. After that, I always made sure to set an alarm on my phone so I wouldn't miss my stop again. Story 8. When I was 15, my parents sent me to what they called a therapeutic boarding school in Montana. What they didn't tell anyone else was where I was going or why. One day I was there, the next day I was gone, and nobody knew what happened to me. The place was basically a prison for teenagers whose parents had money and problems they wanted to disappear. We weren't allowed to make phone calls, send emails, or have any contact with the outside world unless it was supervised. Even our letters home were read and censored before being sent. My best friend told me later that when I vanished, everyone at school thought maybe I'd gotten pregnant or been in some kind of accident. Some people thought my family had moved suddenly. Teachers couldn't say anything because of privacy rules, and my parents just told people I was getting help if anyone asked directly. The worst part was that I wasn't allowed to tell anyone where I was or what was happening. The few letters I was permitted to write had to be approved first, and anything negative about the program got blacked out. So even when I could communicate, I couldn't really explain my situation. I was there for 14 months total. When I finally came home, it was like I'd been erased from everyone's life and then suddenly reappeared. My friends had moved on, my spot on the soccer team was gone, and I had to repeat my sophomore year because the academic program there was a joke. The crazy thing is, my parents still think it was the best thing they ever did for me. They have no idea how messed up that place was or how much damage it did. I'm 23 now and I still have nightmares about being trapped there. But hey, at least I learned never to trust my parents with important decisions about my life. Story 9. The summer I turned 20, I vanished for 9 days and it nearly destroyed my family. I was home from college, living with my parents and working a summer job at a local restaurant. Everything was totally normal. I wasn't depressed, wasn't having any problems, nothing that would explain what happened. I left for work on a Wednesday morning and just never came back. My manager called my parents when I didn't show up, and that's when everyone realized something was seriously wrong. I'm not the type to just disappear without telling anyone. My parents called the police, organized search parties, put up missing person posters all over town. 9 days later, a family friend spotted me at a bus station 3 states away. I was just sitting there, apparently waiting for a bus, but I had no ticket and no money. When they brought me home, I had absolutely no memory of the past week and a half. The last thing I remembered was eating breakfast before work that Wednesday. The police investigated everything. They checked security cameras, interviewed people, tracked my credit card usage. Turns out I'd been functioning normally during those missing days, buying food, staying in motels, even having conversations with people. But I remember none of it. My family took me to every specialist they could find. Neurologists, psychiatrists, you name it. Some thought it was a stress reaction. Others suggested it might be a rare form of epilepsy that affects memory. Nobody could give us a definitive answer. The brain scan showed some unusual patterns, but nothing conclusive. The whole experience really changed our family dynamic. My parents became super overprotective, constantly worried it might happen again. I had to switch schools because the story had gotten around my college campus and everyone treated me like I was fragile or potentially dangerous. It took years of therapy to rebuild any sense of normal life. To this day, I have no idea what I did during those 9 missing days. Sometimes I think it might be better that way. Story 10. This happened when I was about 3 hours from home. My phone had been acting weird all week, randomly shutting off and stuff. Well, on Friday it completely died and I didn't have a charger with me. No big deal, I figured I'd just grab one on the way home. Turns out my mom had been trying to call me all afternoon because my grandmother was in the hospital. When she couldn't reach me, she called my work, but they said I'd already left for the day. Then she called my apartment, no answer. She started freaking out, thinking I'd been in an accident on the highway or something. By the time I got home Saturday morning, there were like 6 voicemails from various family members getting more and more panicked. My mom had even called the local hospitals to see if I'd been admitted. I felt terrible. Now I always make sure to have a backup charger, and I let people know when I'm going to be out of touch. It's crazy how fast people assume the worst when they can't reach you. Story 11. I went missing for almost a week when I was 19, and honestly, I still don't have all the answers. I was living in this small college town, working at a local grocery store during summer break. My roommate said I left for work one Tuesday morning like normal, but I never showed up. Nobody heard from me for 6 days. When I finally came back, I was found sitting in my car in a Walmart parking lot about 200 miles away, totally confused and disoriented. I had no idea how I got there or what I'd been doing. The last thing I remembered was getting ready for work that Tuesday. Everything else was just gone. The police questioned me for hours thinking I was on drugs or lying about something, but all my tests came back clean. My family was convinced I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, which honestly might not be wrong. I ended up seeing a therapist for months trying to piece things together, but we never really figured it out. The scary part is that I was apparently functioning during those missing days. I'd used my debit card at gas stations and restaurants, so I was obviously conscious and making decisions, but I have absolutely no memory of any of it. It's like someone else was living my life for a week. Sometimes I still get panic attacks thinking about what I might have done during that time that I'll never remember. Story 12. I was working as a paramedic at the time, so disappearing without explanation pretty much ended my career in emergency services. People need to be able to rely on you in that job, you know? It started on a Friday night. I remember getting off my shift, stopping by the store to grab some groceries, and heading home to my apartment. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a hospital bed on Tuesday morning with no clue how I got there. A park ranger had found me sleeping on a bench about 50 miles outside the city, totally confused and disoriented. The doctors said I was suffering from something called dissociative amnesia. Basically, my brain just decided to take a vacation and forgot to tell me about it. They think it was triggered by stress. I'd been working crazy hours and dealing with some pretty traumatic calls. But still, 4 whole days just gone from my memory. My supervisor was actually pretty understanding about it, but the department policies were clear. Any unexplained absence, especially in a safety critical role, meant immediate suspension pending investigation. Even with medical documentation, they couldn't risk having someone on the ambulance who might just disappear again. Can't say I blame them, really. I ended up switching careers entirely. Now I work in an office doing data entry, which is about as far from emergency services as you can get. Sometimes I wonder what I did during those missing days, but honestly, I'm kind of afraid to find out. Story 13. This happened about 5 years ago when everything in my life was falling apart at once. I'd been working this soul-crushing office job for 3 years, my long-term relationship had just ended, and I was dealing with some serious anxiety issues that I wasn't getting help for. I felt like I was drowning. One Thursday morning I just didn't show up to work. Instead, I drove to the airport and bought a ticket to the cheapest destination available. Turned out to be Portland. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't even really plan it myself until I was sitting at the gate. For 2.5 weeks, I just wandered around Portland. I stayed in hostels, walked around the city for hours, sat in coffee shops reading books. I turned my phone off after the first day because the constant buzzing was giving me panic attacks. I needed complete silence from my old life. My family was going crazy trying to find me. My sister even posted on social media asking if anyone had seen me. Work obviously fired me, but honestly that was a relief. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had hundreds of messages. The guilt was overwhelming, but I also felt clearer than I had in years. That trip taught me I needed to make some serious changes. I moved to a different city, found a therapist, started a job that didn't make me miserable. My family forgave me eventually, though it took time to rebuild that trust. Sometimes you have to completely disconnect to reconnect with yourself, but yeah, definitely should have left some kind of message. Story 14. I was 19 and working at this electronics store that had terrible inventory management. Their computer system was so outdated that returns and exchanges were basically handled on paper forms. One day I processed this return for a customer who brought back a laptop without a receipt. The system let me create a store credit for full retail price, $1,200, even though the laptop was obviously used. The customer left happy, but I realized I still had the store credit card in my hand. Instead of voiding it like I should have, I pocketed it. Used that credit to buy a bunch of stuff over the next few weeks. Gaming equipment, clothes, even got cash back on some purchases. Nobody noticed because the inventory was such a mess anyway. Then my manager started asking questions about discrepancies in the electronics department. I could see where this was heading, so I just left. Didn't show up for work, didn't call, didn't tell my roommates where I was going. Drove to Las Vegas with what little money I had and tried to reinvent myself. Got a job as a hotel housekeeper using fake references and rented this tiny studio apartment. For 4 months, I was just this anonymous person cleaning rooms and trying not to think about the mess I'd left behind. Vegas was actually perfect for disappearing. Nobody asks questions, everyone's running from something, and you can blend in pretty easily if you keep your head down. Eventually I called my sister and found out the store had just fired me and moved on. No police involved, no charges filed. Came back home, got a different job, and never told anyone the real reason I'd left. Still feel guilty about it, but those months taught me that sometimes you need to hit rock bottom before you can figure out how to build yourself back up. Story 15. This happened about 3 years ago when I was hiking with some college friends up in the mountain. We were doing this overnight backpacking trip, nothing too crazy, just wanted to get away from campus for the weekend. The thing is, I'm one of those people who walks really fast, especially when I'm excited about something. We were heading up to see this waterfall that was supposed to be amazing, and I guess I just got ahead of everyone without realizing it. By the time I stopped to wait for them, I couldn't see or hear anyone from our group. At first I wasn't too worried because I figured they'd catch up. But after like an hour of waiting, it started getting dark and I realized I had totally messed up. I didn't have a flashlight with me because I thought we'd be back at camp way before sunset. Yeah, not my smartest move. The trail split into two paths and I had no clue which way we came from. Everything looked the same in the dark. I tried calling out but my voice just echoed off the rocks. That's when I started to really panic because this area had some pretty steep drops and I couldn't see anything. I ended up finding this little overhang and just stayed put for the night. It got freezing cold and I barely slept, but I knew wandering around in the dark would be way worse. I kept thinking about all those survival shows where they say to stay in one place if you're lost. When the sun came up, I could finally see the trail clearly and figured out which way to go. Took me about 2 hours to get back to our campsite, and my friends were completely losing it. They'd already called the park rangers and everything. Turns out they had stopped to take photos at this scenic overlook, and when they looked around, I was just gone. They spent hours looking for me before heading back to get help. The ranger said I did the right thing staying put, but man, I felt so stupid for getting separated in the first place. Now I always carry a headlamp and stick with the group. That was definitely a wake-up call about how fast things can go wrong in the wilderness. Story 16. So this is probably the most terrifying thing that ever happened to my parents, and honestly I barely remember it because I was only 4. We were at this huge outdoor festival downtown with tons of food vendors and live music. My family had been walking around for hours and I guess I got distracted by something. According to my parents, 1 second I was right next to them and the next I had completely vanished. They said they searched for about an hour before involving security and eventually the police. My mom was completely losing it, thinking the worst had happened. What actually happened was I had seen this really cool street performer doing magic tricks and followed him when he moved to a different spot. I didn't even realize I was lost until the show ended and I looked around for my parents. I started crying immediately. The street performer, who was this older guy with a long gray beard, noticed I was upset and asked where my parents were. When I couldn't tell him, he stayed with me and started asking other performers if they'd seen a frantic couple looking for a little kid. Eventually another performer said yeah, there were police and parents searching near the main stage. The magic guy walked me over there, and when we got close enough I could hear my mom crying and talking to the police officers. The reunion was intense. My parents were sobbing and hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. They thanked the street performer over and over, and my dad actually hired him to do magic at my next birthday party. I found out years later that my disappearance was the reason my parents got me one of those kid leashes for crowded places. I was embarrassed about it then, but now I totally understand why they were so scared. Story 17. This happened during my sophomore year. I went to this house party on Friday night and ended up hitting it off with this guy from my psych class. We were having such a good time talking that when he asked if I wanted to check out this coffee shop he knew about the next day, I said sure. Well, one thing led to another and we ended up spending the entire weekend together. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch turned into a movie, and before I knew it we were back at his apartment just hanging out and talking about everything. My phone had died Friday night and I totally forgot to charge it. I figured my roommate would just assume I was sleeping in or studying somewhere. Big mistake. When I finally got back to my dorm Sunday evening, there were campus security officers waiting in the lobby with my RA. Turns out my roommate had completely freaked out when I didn't come back Friday night, and by Saturday afternoon she was convinced something terrible had happened to me. She'd called my parents, who then called the school, who then called campus security. The whole thing was so embarrassing. I had to explain to this very serious security officer that no, I hadn't been kidnapped or hurt, I was just hanging out with a guy and lost track of time. My roommate was crying when she saw me. Apparently she'd been imagining all sorts of awful scenarios. I felt terrible for worrying everyone, but honestly part of me was touched that she cared that much. Now we have a rule about checking in if either of us is going to be gone overnight. Story 18. This is probably going to sound really weird, but I went missing from my own life for about a week because of a medical emergency that messed with my memory. I was 19 and had been having these headaches for a while, but I just thought they were from stress at college. One day I was walking to class and apparently I just collapsed. I don't remember any of this part, but my roommate said I hit my head pretty hard when I fell. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed with no idea how I got there. The doctors said I'd had some kind of seizure and then seemed confused and disoriented for several days. During that time, I'd apparently gotten up and left the hospital while they were running tests. My family was going crazy looking for me. The hospital had called them when I first came in, so they knew something was wrong. But then when I disappeared from there they had no idea what happened. The police were involved, there were search parties, the whole thing. Turns out I'd been wandering around town for about 4 days, but I have zero memory of it. People later told me they'd seen me at different places, the library, a coffee shop, just walking around looking confused. I guess I seemed mostly normal but would ask the same questions over and over. A store clerk finally called an ambulance when I kept asking him where I was and couldn't remember my own address. When I woke up in the hospital the second time, my memory started coming back gradually. The doctors said it was some kind of brain inflammation that caused temporary amnesia and confusion. The scary part was realizing that I'd been completely vulnerable for days and had no idea. I could have gotten hurt or worse and wouldn't have even known to ask for help. My parents were so relieved when they found me, but I could tell they were also kind of traumatized by the whole experience. I'm totally fine now, the inflammation went away with treatment and my memory is back to normal. But it really made me think about how fragile our minds are and how much we take for granted just being able to remember who we are and where we belong. Story 19. This happened when I was 9 and my family still talks about it at every holiday gathering. We were camping at this huge state park with like 200 campsites spread out over different areas. Our site was pretty far from the main facilities, which my parents chose because they wanted peace and quiet. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom really badly. My parents were fast asleep and I didn't want to wake them up. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward where I thought the bathrooms were, but apparently I got completely turned around in the dark. I kept walking and walking, thinking the bathroom had to be just around the next bend. Everything looked the same, just trees and more trees. My flashlight started getting dim and I realized I had no idea how to get back to our campsite. All the campsites looked identical in the dark. I started panicking and calling for my parents, but there was no response. I was walking around in circles for hours, just crying and yelling for help. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and it was getting really cold. At one point I sat down next to this picnic table and just sobbed, thinking I was going to be stuck out there forever. Around sunrise, I heard someone calling my name. It was a park ranger with a search dog who'd been looking for me all night. Turns out my dad had woken up around 2 a.m., found me missing, and immediately called the park authorities. They'd had teams of people searching different sections of the campground. The ranger brought me back to our campsite where my parents, grandparents, and like 6 other rangers were all waiting. My mom grabbed me and wouldn't let go for like 20 minutes. My dad looked like he hadn't slept at all. The crazy thing is, I was only about half a mile from our campsite, but I'd been walking in a big circle the whole time. The ranger said it happens more often than people think. Kids get disoriented in the woods and just keep walking the wrong direction. We never went camping again after that. My parents said it took 10 years off their lives. Story 20. I disappeared for 6 months when I was 19, but it wasn't what anyone thought. My family was going through this horrible divorce situation, parents screaming every night, lawyers calling constantly, everyone wanting me to pick sides. I was supposed to start college in the fall, but I just couldn't handle any of it anymore. So I withdrew my entire college fund, about $8,000, and bought a one-way ticket to Denver. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. Just left a note saying I needed time to think and that I was safe. Found this job at a ski resort in Colorado where they provided housing and meals. Used a fake social security number I found online and told them I was taking a gap year. The work was brutal, cleaning rooms, hauling equipment, but I loved every second of it. Living in those employee dorms was like being at summer camp. Everyone was either running from something or trying to figure out their life. We'd ski on our days off and stay up all night just talking about everything except our real problems. My mom somehow tracked me down through my bank account around month 5. She drove all the way to Colorado crying and begging me to come home. The divorce had finalized, my dad had moved out, and she said she just wanted things to go back to normal. I went back, started college a year late, and nobody ever talked about those 6 months again. But honestly, it was exactly what I needed. Sometimes you have to disappear to figure out who you actually are.